It was a late night, just past midnight, when Sarah stepped into the 24-hour McDonald's on the outskirts of town. She had been working a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, and the thought of a hot meal and a quiet moment to herself was all she could think about. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for one other car parked at the far end. The dimly lit neon sign of the Golden Arches flickered faintly, almost as if something was wrong with it. She shrugged off the feeling and made her way inside. The doors creaked slightly as they opened, and the chill of the night air mixed with the warm, greasy scent of fries and burgers. There were no other customers in sight. The only sound was the soft hum of the kitchen in the back. Behind the counter stood an employee, a young man, no older than 18, with a gaunt face and a tired look in his eyes. He gave her a strange, almost vacant smile. "What can I get for you?" he asked, his voice almost too monotone. Sarah ordered a Big Mac and fries, then took a seat near the window. As she sat there, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her stomach. The place was eerily quiet, too quiet for a McDonald's at this hour. The kitchen was silent, and the usual chime of the drive-through speaker was absent. It felt as though time itself had stopped. A few minutes later, the young man brought her food to the table. "Here you go," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something unsettling about his gaze, something unnatural. "Thanks," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. But when she looked down at the tray, her stomach dropped. The fries were pale, almost lifeless, and the burger seemed to have been thrown together in a hurry, sloppy and unnatural. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. She glanced toward the kitchen, noticing that the light seemed to flicker sporadically. The young man didn't answer at first. Instead, he stared at her with those cold, empty eyes. "You should be careful," he said in a low voice. "The McDonald's, it has a history." Sarah frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" The young man glanced over his shoulder nervously, as though checking for someone. "People, they come here, they eat, and then they disappear. The ones who eat here at night, especially when it's quiet like this, they never come back." The air in the room grew heavy, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She thought he was just a tired kid, messing around to pass the time, but something in his voice made her doubt her assumptions. Before she could respond, the young man backed away slowly, still watching her with that unsettling gaze. He disappeared behind the counter, and Sarah was left alone with the strange, lifeless food in front of her. She couldn't bring herself to eat it. Something felt off, but her exhaustion overtook her, and her eyes grew heavy. She blinked once, twice, and then everything around her seemed to fade into darkness. When Sarah woke up, it wasn't the soft hum of the restaurant she heard. Instead, there was silence, an unnatural silence. The once bright golden arches outside had turned a sickly shade of yellow. The walls were cracked, the floors covered in grime, and the bright overhead lights flickered erratically. Panic set in as she realized she wasn't in the same McDonald's anymore. The place had changed, twisted into something from her nightmares. The door to the kitchen slammed shut, and a low, guttural growl echoed from behind it. As she stood to flee, she noticed something horrifying. Her reflection in the glass window was not her own. It was the same young man, the one who had served her earlier, standing there with the same vacant eyes. "You're part of it now," his voice echoed in her head, as if he were standing right beside her. "You ate, and now you'll never leave." With every ounce of strength left in her body, Sarah ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. She slammed her hands against it, screaming for help, but the only response was a faint echo of her own voice. From the corner of her eye, she saw more shadows moving, figures, like the young man who had once worked here. They surrounded her, closing in. It was then that she remembered something, the legend of McDonald's. That particular location had been built on the site of an old, forgotten fast food chain that had mysteriously shut down decades ago. Local legend said that the spirits of the workers, those who had never made it out, were trapped inside, bound by the food they served, and those who dared to eat at night were doomed to join them in the darkness. But it was too late. Sarah had already eaten. The next morning, the McDonald's was open as usual. The young man was gone, replaced by a fresh-faced employee who greeted customers with a bright smile. But every now and then, a customer would report a strange sight, an empty chair at the far end of the restaurant, with a half-eaten Big Mac sitting on the table, growing cold and moldy. Some say if you sit there long enough, you'll see her, Sarah, staring at you through the window, her eyes wide with terror, trapped forever in the curse of the golden arches.